Hey, what's going on? So trekking season is upon us. It's August 2023 and September through December are some of the best months for trekking in Nepal. And with that being the case, I wanted to make an update video to the video I made back in March of this year, talking about the independent trekking ban in Nepal. So for those that don't know, let me catch you up. In March 2023, the Nepal Tourism Board declared that independent trekking was no longer allowed in Nepal. And this was a pretty big decision because for a long time, you were able to just go to Nepal and trek almost anywhere in the country without a guide. But this mandate changed that. So I'm just going to give an update to that situation as well as reiterate some options for people that are still interested in trekking in Nepal without a guide. So there's a few things I want to discuss, a few bullet points. The first one is the enforcement of the independent trekking ban. So back in April, I think there was a lot of skepticism from the trekking community at large as to whether or not Nepal would actually be able to enforce these rules. Because it has been the case in the past where Nepal has made certain rules and then they are not enforced or they're disregarded. A famous example is probably, I think it was 2018, I brought this up in my previous video, of honking horns being banned within the Kathmandu Valley. And after April 1st, where the mandate was said to be implemented from, there were reports of foreign trekkers having no issues independently trekking in Nepal. That maybe they got some grief at checkpoints that said you need a guide or you should have a guide, but that there was no real enforcement of these rules. I think as of June or July, and I couldn't find this online, so I'm taking it at face value. It seems like there was an announcement either from the tourism board or the Nepal government saying that trekkers found independently trekking were going to be fined even more than the initial fine that they had imposed on people caught independently trekking. So what I mean to say by even bringing this up is that although there was some skepticism at first, it does seem that the crackdown and the enforcement of these rules is an indication that things are going to be changing, that you're not going to be able to get away with independent trekking unless there is some big rule change, like a reversal of this decision. Okay, point number 2, places that you can still trek in Nepal without a guide. So I did the big stream, the big hour-and-a-half long video on this channel, talking about a lot of the places that you can go without a guide still. I'm going to distill it all down into this video so that you, the viewer, do not have to click through that hour-and-a-half long video and try to find, these spots. So I'm gonna list 4 here, 4 big ones that I think people who are looking to go to Nepal and trek in the Himalayas can go to without still needing a guide. The first group is encompassing a large area. This is, I would call it the hilly section of Nepal. So I had a question on my channel just today. It was asking about whether or not it's still okay to trek around the Kathmandu Valley. And yes, you can do that. Although the mandate specifically says that you need a guide for the national parks in Nepal, there are some national parks that you still don't need a guide. So for example, Shivapuri, Godawari, Nagarkot, that area around the Kathmandu Valley, you do not need a guide to go trekking there. Pokhara, the area around Pokhara, Dampus and Poon Hill, you do not need a guide to trek to these places. Pikey Peak, south of the Everest region. These areas, these hilly areas, outside of the national parks, you don't need a guide to trek in. So although you're not necessarily in the Himalayas, if you're somebody who's maybe either not used to trekking or wants something a little easier to ease yourself into the world of trekking, these are perfect hikes and treks for you to go on. You still get the tea house experience. You still will most likely see the Himalayas. It's just a little bit easier and outside of the range of these national parks so that you don't need a guide. Number 2, the Everest region. The entire Everest region is open to independent trekkers. This is the entire Solukhumbu region, so from Lukla going to Namche Bazaar, you can go up to Everest Base Camp, you can go to the Gokyo region, you can do the 3 passes. That whole area is open to independent trekkers. You do not need a guide to go on those treks. The Everest region operates outside of the jurisdiction of these mandates. They have their own system in place for trekkers, and part of that means that you don't need a guide when you go to the Everest region. Number 3 and 4 are just personal picks of mine. I've not been to either of these places. They are national parks, but they do not require that you need a guide. They are also very difficult to reach areas of Nepal, but that's sort of my wheelhouse. I kind of like that, so I wanted to throw these picks in for you. The first one is Rara Lake. It is the largest freshwater lake in Nepal. It's found in the western region. It's surrounded by hills, and from the top of these hills, you can see the Himalayas. It looks beautiful. It doesn't really look like Nepal. It looks almost like something you'd see out in the Rocky Mountains. It takes a while to get there. You need to probably take at least 2 planes, maybe 3, or a close to probably 48-hour bus ride, but you don't need a guide. So there you go. The 4th is the Shea Phoksundo National Park. Hi everyone, Editing Goro here. Before we begin this section, I just want to give a disclaimer that I don't think I can 100% say that this park does not require a guide. Upon further inspection of my sources, including the Shea Phoksundo National Park website, I believe it's possible that despite there being a distinction between Shea Phoksundo and the Dopal regions, a permit officer could still require a foreign trekker have a guide for this trek. I'm skeptical, but since I can't put my 100% certainty behind it, I wanted to offer this disclaimer before we begin. Okay, back to the video. So, although this is a national park, and although it's surrounded by areas that you need a guide to go in, namely the upper and lower Dolpo regions, according to the Shea Phoksundo National Park's website, you can independently trek in the Ringmo region and the Phoksundo region of the park. This area, again, I've not been to it. It looks absolutely stunning. It has these crystal clear blue waters and the hills shooting right out of these waters, going straight up. It looks incredible. I don't know to what extent the Ringmo or the Phoksundo region, how many days that takes. But it does seem like this is another area that you do not need a guide for. Okay, so there are some options for people who are still interested in going to Nepal. And just let me say this, I think you should go to Nepal. I highly recommend going to Nepal. I love Nepal. This decision has not changed any of my feelings about Nepal. If you want to independently trek, you can still do it. You're just a little more limited, that's all. But I would still recommend that you go and visit Nepal. Number 4, will this decision change? No. If I had to guess, this decision is never going to be reversed. And the reason is basically money. And not in like some conspiratorial way, but more that the number of people who would have come to Nepal but now will not because independent trekking is banned is not big enough for Nepal to reverse this decision. I would go so far to say that this decision can only really benefit Nepal in the long run. I'm surprised, honestly, that this decision didn't come sooner. And listen, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about how and why this decision was implemented. There are a lot of reasons to be disappointed, too, that independent trekking in some of the most beautiful areas of the world is no longer an option. But I don't want to be too much of a bummer, so I will end on this note. I think the only hope, I guess, of any sort of decision like this changing would be that maybe, and I'll be honest, I don't know how this would work. I don't know even if it would be able to work this way. The only way that this would change is if the other trekking regions that are implementing this decide to implement the Solukhumbu region's model. Solukhumbu, because it is such a popular trekking region, has implemented its own way of keeping track of trekkers and trying to keep them safe. And if it so happens that maybe more people end up going to Everest and Everest sees a surge in visitors because possibly of this decision, then I could see some of these other areas of Nepal changing the way that they do it and getting rid of the guided system in favor of some regional tracking system. But that's the only sort of that's the only sort of change I foresee in the future. So I hope this video gave some brief clarity to the independent trekking situation in Nepal. And just so you know, I'm no expert. I understand certain things about the way Nepal works, just from living there for a certain period of time, but I only trek as a hobby. So just take everything I say with a grain of salt, a grain of noon. But what do you think? Do you think these rules are going to change? Are you still planning on trekking in Nepal? Let me know in the comments below. I just want to say thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. It really helps the channel out. If you really enjoyed this video, think about subscribing. We'll be back in Nepal this trekking season, and I plan on filming everything that goes on, all of our experiences. So if you'd like to see more of that, make sure to subscribe. If nothing else, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.